the past. This week, I'm Gabe Neitzel, joined by Homer, and we are talking about an important game, Week 13 of the 1996 season. So, just a quick scene setter. The Packers are coming off of back-to-back losses. Lost at Kansas City, lost at Dallas on Monday Night Football, where they didn't give up a touchdown, gave up seven field goals against the Cowboys, lost in Dallas once again. So, it's a team that has been dominant the entire year. They're beat up. Chewy was out of this game. No Free, no Robert Brooks. Andre Rison was signed. This was his first game. John Michaels is playing left tackle. Like, the offensive line is beat up. Sean Jones is missing in this game. There's all sorts of injuries all over the place. And for those who may be watching or listening to this, in 1996, you would have been at Channel 12, right? You were doing Pack Attack.
Yes, on a weekly basis, I was interviewing Reggie White, and this was the first big year that from day one, the assumption was that they were going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, I remember being a kid and getting the Sports Illustrated back when, being on the Sports Illustrated cover was a big deal, and they had the Packers and it said Super Bowl or bust. I think it was Favre, it might have been Reggie and Robert Brooks. I think were the three on the cover. I can still picture it to this day. And when you were talking to the guys through this stretch, was there any crisis of confidence? Were they still ready to go? Because, again, the Rams were terrible. Like, this is a bad Rams team. We'll get to the first half and how that unfolded in just a second. But after losing back-to-back games, Chewy, one of my favorite things about Chewy is he says good teams never win back-to-back or never lose back-to-back games. I go, you guys lost back-to-back games in 96, and then he quickly retracts off that. But this team lost back-to-back games, and it seemed like the season was kind of hanging in the balance as they headed down to St. Louis.
I don't remember it ever being out of bounds, so like anybody was worried. The assumption was that they're going to bounce back by putting a whooping on the Rams because the Rams were horrible, and the fact that they had added Andre Rison.
Yeah.
And no one knew exactly, but you lose. Brooks was out for the year, if I have it right.
Yeah, so, he had torn his ACL against the Niners earlier in the year.
And then he got released. It gave the feeling like things are just going to work out. Like, how does Andre Rison, though everybody worried about because his girlfriend burnt down their house or something.
Yeah, Left Eye Lopez, yep.
Yes. But aside from that, like, you need a receiver and you lose two in a row, and they literally released him, I think, the next day. And then the Packers signed him.
Yeah, they picked him up right away.
Right. And this game became the curiosity of, so how quickly is Rison going to get involved with the team? But it was fundamentally the belief that they're going to win this game, and whatever happens after that, fine. But the Rams are horrible. And I remember the game because I thought the first half they could lose. They were not only behind, the Rams were so much more aggressive.
It was bad.
The Rams beat the crap out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure they didn't actually, you couldn't even say they did that for the whole game because the Packers certainly gained some confidence, but it was based on the Rams screwing things up. But in terms of which team was more physical and which team looked better, it was the Rams.
I guess the only thing that I remember being concerned about as a kid going into this game is the Packers had horrible, outside of Detroit, because the Lions were terrible. But anytime the Packers were playing in a dome back then, and mostly it was the Metrodome, I think that's kind of what started that line of thinking. Like, the Packers were terrible in domes. Like, they could not play inside, which it's funny because then when Aaron Rodgers comes, later and they become so good in domes. But at that point in Brett Favre's career, the Packers sucked in domes. They didn't know how to deal with all the noise at that point.
Yeah, everything was trumped by they're playing the Rams. They're not going to lose to the Rams. And again, when they got, the biggest play to me of the regular season was Evans' interception.
Yes. So that's interesting. So that, to me, the Evans interception that gets returned for a touchdown is the thought that's the play that saved the season. I completely forgot until I watched it back about the Packers are down 7-0 late in the first half.
Right.
They get the ball back. Favre, right after the Rams score a touchdown, Favre has one of the more inexplicable safeties you could possibly take. He drifted 15 to 20 yards back into the end zone, tries an underhand throw it away. There's nobody in the area. I don't know what he was begging. He's begging for some sort of call from the official, but it's an easy safety call.
Yeah, I know Mike Homer thought I knew I should have played for him. I mean, that was one of the stupidest plays he's ever made.
It was unbelievable. So now they're down 9-0 and they get the free kick. But the Rams, because they're the Rams, never grab the football, never touch it. Craig Hentrick punts it high in the air and the ball bounces. Mike Pryor, jumps on it, and the Packers get the ball and they get 3 points before halftime. So at least something is salvaged. I think that's pretty big too. Just the fact that they got the ball to get the 3 points. And I had completely forgotten that that's how they got their 3 points in the half.
And then they get the interception and you're going, they're ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just the belief that they'll find a way.
Mm-hmm.
That this team will find a way. And certainly in the case of this one, they did. But yeah, there were incredible elements where they just were lucky.
Oh, yeah. And again, like you mentioned, they got worked in the first half.
And Favre had stupid interceptions. I mean, they were...
And one of them being later in the game. Like,
Correct.
He threw an interception in the first half where he overshot Andre. One when they were already up. I don't know if there was 24-9 quite yet.
Well, no, this was what I had forgotten. And that when the Packers got up, they made St. Louis punt. And then Favre threw an interception.
Yep.
And then... the Rams fumbled on like the snap.
Oh, yeah, right away.
Right
Gave it
right
back to the
Favre
Packers.
made a mistake, the Rams, because it could have changed back
to St. Louis. The way that they had been playing, because the first half, the Packers didn't move the ball at all.
Right.
Like, they couldn't run it. Brett was constantly under pressure.
I think it was 1 first down to like 10 for the Rams.
Yeah, they had, I mean, the Packers had less than 100 yards total offense in the first half.
The defense was good in the second half. And there was more aggressiveness there.
And it's not like
ended that.
And it's not like the defense played horribly in the first half. It's just they got like 4 yards. 4 yards. It seemed like they would get these little chunk plays, and then Isaac Bruce would get wide open, and Isaac Bruce was starting to come into his
There were
own.
like 20 punts in the first half. All they did is take the ball, punt, give the ball, punt. I mean, I'd have to go back. I bet there were 7 or 8. Nobody moved the ball at all.
No, I think the one thing that Mike Patrick, who was doing the game, this was an ESPN Sunday night game. It was Mike Patrick, Joe Theismann were on the call, and he kept referencing how the Packers hadn't been past their own 35 until they recovered. I mean, it wasn't an onside kick, but they recovered the free kick. That was the first time that they had crossed their own 35.
Yeah.
It was that horrific of an offensive first half.
No, but again, and the whole time of watching it was not only that, but just watching to see Rison and they made the comparison, Theismann appropriate, that it was like Sterling Sharp, because they wanted to see. I mean, it was like he's just throwing the ball to him.
Yeah.
Figuring out, I remember the assumption that he just wants to see the best way to use him. And I remember thinking he's good.
Oh, yeah. There were a couple of times where he flashed and he had some really nice plays. I mean, he had a bigger game than I remember. I remember being excited that he was playing. And he ended up having a decent game. He didn't score a touchdown, but he still had a pretty decent game for a guy that, and I wasn't tracking how many snaps he played. It would have been very hard given the graininess of the video that's available on YouTube, and we'll tweet out the link once this podcast is posted. But, I mean, he still had a pretty solid game, all things considered. I mean, they were saying he was going to play 20 to 25 snaps. I got to imagine he ended up playing more than that just out of sheer necessity.
Well, and you wondered what he had left. He just gotten cut.
Yeah.
Like, what is the problem here? And you watch him go like, I don't know what the problem was there, but there's, he looks good.
Yeah, the athleticism, the speed, he had everything going for him. And this is a Packers team that was so beat up. I don't remember. I remember Terry Mickens just because he had 2 touchdowns against Detroit that year after everyone got hurt. So Terry Mickens, Derek Mays, Beebs, and Rison are basically their wide receivers. Every once in a while, Desmond Howard would come in, but it was pretty rare for him to play.
It was clear in that game, watching it, that how important BB was. Like, BB was good.
Oh, and Brett trusted him.
Yes.
Just trusted him to do anything he needed him to do.
And BB knew I could get killed on any catch. He said, "Put me anywhere and throw the ball. I got to catch it." But yeah, I think the biggest part of the game, because they ended up winning, was the belief immediately that Rison can fill in for Brooks.
Yeah,
doesn't mean he's going to be as big, but when Antonio Freeman comes back,
mm-hmm.
and they just had multiple weapons for Brett Favre. We aren't
Yeah.
even talking about Keith Jackson,
who had a nice game. I think they had
Yes.
mentioned he had like 7 catches for almost 100 yards against the Cowboys the week before. I mean, he went to the Pro Bowl that year. Like
Right.
Chewy was coming off the Pro Bowl year in 95, and Keith didn't show up until halfway through 95. But in 1996, Keith was the Pro Bowl. Like Keith is the one who ended up having such a huge year at tight end, had a big game here. Another guy that Brett absolutely trusted. There were some times where, the blitz is coming in. He's like, all right, Keith is there. I'm just going to kind of flip it to Keith, and Jackson would come down.
Right. And you go back and when we talk more current about Rodgers or did he have any weapons? You go back and look at, man, Favre had a ton of weapons, even when Brooks got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So then you had Rison, and then you had Freeman, and then you had Jackson, and then you had Chewy, and then, the running backs could catch. They were just, he had a lot of options.
Dorsey and
Beebe.
Edgar and Beebe.
Yes.
And I mean, that offense was stacked. It was absolutely stacked.
And yet they didn't stop with what they have. They went out and got Beebe.
Mm-hmm.
They went out and got Jackson, and then went out and got Rison. I mean, the ability of Ron Wolf and the desire to add veterans for them to win a championship, and and from Sean Jones, he wouldn't
Santana
stop.
had a big game too. Yeah,
Right.
Santana was great. Sean Jones, as I mentioned, was injured for this game.
Eugene
Robinson,
yes. And I'd forgotten. If you had told me that Michael started a game, I don't know when they brought in who was the guy that the guy who couldn't. I think he became a left tackle in the Super Bowl, but I didn't even remember that Michaels ever started a game that season.
Either did I. I had assumed that Michaels had never started just based on the way that Chewy talked about Michaels and the way that Chewy has talked on the radio about how Ron Wolf talked about Michaels.
Right.
Like how I guess I might have been, one of those guys that
Newhouse. Who was the guy that played it left tackle?
No, it was.
But
so you had Dotson, and then you had.
I think it's the left hand. But I mean, my point is somebody else. But Wolf was always looking to add veterans to make the team better.
Oh, 100%. And at all times. And that's what Andre Rison kind of represented at this point.
I mean, they were good at 95. They could have won the title. I mean, they feel like they could have beaten Dallas and he was there. But that didn't keep him from making improvements.
No, because he wanted to make sure if we have to go down to Dallas, I want to make sure we've got enough guys. And Edgar and Dorsey were draft picks. Chewy, obviously a draft pick. Robert came into his own. I think the knee injury he suffered in 96 kind of robbed him of being a really good receiver. Right. But the year that he had in 1995, he's probably one of the more underrated receivers in Packers history, especially after watching that game with Scafidi.
He came back with Sharp. The fact that Sharp had to retire.
Yeah.
And Robert Brooks, I think, took over like the next year.
He did.
To a degree that no one thought possible.
No, I think he broke Sterling's receiving yards record. I don't know if he broke the reception record for that.
But that didn't seem possible because Sharp, the numbers were unbelievable, as good as he was. Like, Brooks isn't going to, in no way he can be that good. And to do it as quickly as he did. But there were just veterans and adding more and more and more. And I mean, Eugene Robinson was huge on the defense. And that's the part of Ron Wolf that people don't talk about much because they just talk more about the draft choices he had.
But I mean, the little things he would do here and there to supplement. I mean, Chewy has always talked about how Ron Wolf wanted to pay for position players, pay for guys who scored touchdowns, and wasn't going to pay necessarily along the offensive line. And that's just a strategy that worked out for the Packers at that time. Like if they had a David Bakhtiari back then, I don't know if Ron Wolf would have made David Bakhtiari the highest paid left tackle if David Bakhtiari played in 96 or 97.
I don't think he would have.
Yeah. He would have gone, no, I'm going to pay money for a different position, a guy like Free or Brooks or someone like that.
Yeah.
Or Keith Jackson, obviously he paid Keith Jackson. And this was not a very good game. The second half, I thought was a lot smoother than it was. I had forgotten about the 2 interceptions that Brett threw in the second half. But this is also a game where it had one of the Brett Favre highlights of 1996.
Oh yeah, when he had the pass to
Dorsey Levens.
Yeah, no, and they were talking. I love Joe Theismann. It was good to hear him because other than calling him Donald Evans, he didn't.
You noticed that too.
He did it more than once.
I wondered if his real name was Donald, like Donald Doug Evans, and like his middle name was Doug, and he just went by Doug. And no, this was just Joe.
But I mean, Theismann didn't do justice to the way he played and he never really put things in that context. But yeah, that pass to me, it seemed like a stupid pass. There's no way he could know. I don't know what he saw to decide. There were two Packers there.
Jeff Thomason was the third tight end, second tight end for this game, and Dorsey's the one who caught it.
But yeah, I mean, wasn't there to ask him on the road, like, what did you actually see? Because it seemed like I don't know, let's give it a shot.
He was third down. Let's just flip one over this linebacker.
Another time I wish to hear when he came over what
Holmgren had to say. Well, because it was a broken play. If you haven't seen this play, again, you can search it, you can find it. Just search Brett Favre Rams, and I'm sure you'll find it. It's in the
they only had 2 touchdowns. It was that one and the one to Keith Jackson.
Correct.
And that was Jackson was easy.
Yeah, this was the second touchdown. Favre rolls all the way to his right, which is the original design play. Nothing's there. Starts rolling back left. Jukes back to avoid one off defensive lineman. Another defensive lineman grabs the back of his jersey, somehow runs away from that, who's DeMarco Farr, who is one of the better defensive linemen in the league at that point. Gets away from Farr. Linebacker decides to crash up, and before he can get him, Favre just flips it to Dorsey Levin's touchdown.
I can imagine Homer going, you're the luckiest SOB in the world. But, you go back and watch how many times it happened.
Oh, he did stuff like that.
Yeah. Right. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that, as they said to me when I talked to people at Southern Miss about him, the smartest quarterback they ever had, because they said he knew where everybody was supposed to be, and he was willing to try anything because he knew how good his arm was. But I want an update on that play. Dorsey would probably.
Dorsey would be he would be definitely.
But yeah, it was in the high. And if you were going to have highlights of the season, that's one of them.
Oh yeah, no,
that's a Brett Favre classic.
That's a Brett. It was just kind of fun to watch him play again, even though it's grainy, and just some of the things he did. There was another pass earlier to Beebs where he just took a 3 or 5 step drop, and the second that right foot came down, just rips one into a hole that, again, it seems like the ball catches Beebe more than he's catching it. And then he takes a big hit, and Beebs, because he's Beebs, holds on.
Yeah, well, no, they talked about how the different receivers where he broke people's fingers, and you could hear the ball coming. And those things both seem possible based on what you saw in that game. And then you see the benefit, and it's true, of when he was young. I mean, it's just different.
Yeah.
When he was young, he had the ability. Everything he did was quicker.
Yes.
In terms of the things that he could do and how crazy the plays could be.
How athletic he was.
Yes, correct. So he could make people miss or do those things. And just how light he looks.
Yeah. Which is amazing because he came in. I don't know if you've ever heard Chewy tell this story. So Chewy, Favre and Chewy came in the same year.
Right.
Brett had already been in the league for a year because he was in Atlanta, got traded. Chewy was, a 6th round pick, got drafted. And I don't know if it was OTAs or the first training camp practice, and Chewy's sitting in the lunchroom the first time he meets Brett. And he's like, hey, what position do you play? And Brett goes, quarterback. Chewy goes, you sure? Because he said he looked like a middle linebacker. Because Favre probably weighed 240, 245 at that point. Slimmed down. I think they said he was 220.
And he still might have been big in that game.
Yeah.
Against her. I'm just saying, you watch him and go, there's a quickness
there. The athleticism that just stands out. Just the athleticism from Brett that you forgot as he continued to get older with the Packers.
Right.
You just completely forgot about that type of athleticism. This 1996 team, again, no questions, I think, with this game were kind of, I think everybody was relieved they won the game.
No, if they'd have lost the game, then everything would have changed.
Everyone
because the fear would have been the offense isn't the same.
Mm-hmm.
With all the people missed, and that this may not be, it may be more difficult. This game just added one. Yep, they'll get it done. They'll figure out a way. And the greatness to me also of both the offense and the defense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, both sides of the ball could take over a game.
You know how good the defense was because it had Reggie, it had Leroy. But all those veterans that you mentioned, I mean, Gilbert Brown set the tone in that second half. He had a couple of huge tackles right at the line of scrimmage, the way he dominated. It's easy to forget, I think, just how great that defense was.
Yeah, but they had like 11 good players.
Yeah.
And then they had, it was Reggie, and he was at one level. And then there was Leroy. He was the next level. But then after that, I mean, they were all good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, a lot of them being veterans. I mean, you mentioned Sean Jones and Santana Dotson coming in and supplementing that defensive line, along with Gilbert and Reggie, who were there the previous year. On the linebacker core, I mean, Wayne Simmons was a crazy person who was, really good defensively and set a lot of tones in that linebacking core. George Kuntz was a solid linebacker that they had. Brian Williams was the other linebacker. And then in the secondary, I mean, their third corner was Tyrone Williams, who I believe was a rookie that year, had some plays in the playoffs, but they knew they could rely on Evans. They knew they could rely on Newsome. And they had 3 good safeties too.
Yes.
Because Mike Pryor would come in, and whenever he was in the game, it doesn't seem like you would miss a beat. I mean, yeah, Leroy could do some different things, and Eugene had some plays, but they had some. Anytime somebody had to leave, they take a breather. It didn't seem like there was that much of a drop off.
Everybody was good. You think of all 11 of those players, you have no problem with any of them. You didn't say, "Well, he tends to do this." No, they were all good.
Yeah. I mean, again, and then you had a couple of great players that really helped
which
kind
is
of
why
separate.
Why they had the best defense in the league.
Yeah.
They gave up the fewest points.
And they had young players. Gabe Wilkins had a sack in this game because Sean Jones was hurt. Of course, Gabe Wilkins would famously,
Darius Holland, they mentioned.
Yeah, Darius Holland was in the game.
But
Gabe
Wilkins were just afterthoughts. There was no,
but I'm saying that was the thing with Ron though. He had these veterans, but you had Tyrone Williams, who again would become a starter eventually. Gabe Wilkins became a starter the next year when they let go of Sean Jones, which I think something that Ron regretted, because especially after Wilkins then refused to play in the Super Bowl against Denver because he was protecting himself in a hamstring injury. But Wilkins became a starter, and he had a pretty solid 1997. So again, when these guys played, this was their opportunity and it allowed them to grow. And you could see how Ron, built that team for 1996 with the veterans that he had, but he also had to play. It's not like he was the Rams. Oh, I'm going all in here. He also had watching this game reminded me how good Ron Wolf was, and made me appreciate him a little bit more, even though I know he's a Hall of Famer and all those things. But you could see how he found a way that no other GM since him has been able to balance winning now and also having those draft picks and having those young players still on the roster. So if one of those veterans is gone or gets hurt, we'll slide in our young guy and we're going to be okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's his great disappointment because they were so good going to the next season. Mm-hmm. I remember when Leroy Butler said 16-0. Come on, Leroy. You just got to feel like they thought they were that good. Mm-hmm. And when he looks back, I'm sure Wolf, it was letting some of those veterans go. It was needing help from younger players that they didn't need the year before. They assisted, but they were none of them put in a role, as they were in the next year, like when they let Simmons go and Sean Jones. So that'd be a good thing. I don't know how much Ron Wolf has said about that, but
was there anything else from this game that stood out to you? I mean, we mentioned the ridiculous touchdown, the Doug Evans pick six, which kind of turned the season around because from players that have talked about it, Chewy included, the way that they were getting after one another. And it was a testy locker room at halftime in St. Louis because they were down, 9-3 at that point. Right. And they thought, much like everybody else, they were going to roll the Rams. Anything else that stood out from you from this game?
No, we didn't. I mean, it was just that all the things that occurred that were bad, and they won by 15 points. That's what good teams do. There was nothing about it, yet there was nothing special about any of the performance other than, I would say, the interception. Mm-hmm. And yet they still won by 15. Feel like that's what a really good team does. And no one knows, and I certainly don't, if they had lost this game, what would have happened. Maybe it would have made no difference whatsoever. But
they're 12-4 instead of 13-3.
Right. But would it have affected their confidence? There was never a lack. There was never a point, even when they lost 2 games in a row. Nobody said that, and they'll be fine. And the same. And so the first half, and there might be another game, but the first half was like the worst half of the whole season.
It was the worst first half to that point because they came out of halftime and Mike Patrick's running down the numbers.
Right, but it was
in terms of like yards and first downs.
Right,
it was the worst half of football for the Packers since they said 1991.
And I would emphasize they got their butts kicked. I mean, the Rams seemed more aggressive. I don't know if it was Theismann or whoever who said they just seemed flat. But they not only were behind, but I mean, the Rams don't beat up anybody.
No.
I mean, I'd forgotten how bad the Rams were in terms of, the worst team in the last decade or something like that. So it was not only that they were behind, but like nobody did that. Packers didn't win every game, but nobody beat them up and just seemed more aggressive and quicker. And then after the interception, like, okay.
Oh, I guess we're going to win this game.
Yeah, they're going to be fine. And then they made the plays and they win by 15. I don't know how Chewy has said how they were, but I'm assuming that everything was fine.
Because then they started to get healthy and the offensive line got healthy and Free returned the next week. I think Chewy returned that week or maybe even just the week after. And they started to get healthy. The defense, Sean Jones was back the following week and they just started to get healthier. And you could pair Antonio Freeman, who had a big game against the Bears the following week, with Andre Rison and everything just kind of started falling into place. In fact, that 10-3 or that 9-3 lead was the last time the Packers trailed in the second half for the rest of the season. Yeah. They didn't trail in the second half from that point on. They obviously won out and ended up winning the Super Bowl, but that just kind of showed how dominant that team was, that they didn't face a second half deficit.
Yeah, and so it's a forgotten game, but it's not forgotten to anybody who remembers the first half. And they had said the Rams seemed to screw it up in the second half with a number of other games, and the same thing happened again.
Tony Banks was their quarterback. He had the most interceptions in the league. He had the most fumbles in the league. Yes. It was just bad football. But for a half, they were and just shy of a half. So I would say for 28 minutes, the Rams played for them almost perfect football, and then screwed it up when they didn't grab a free kick that the Packers jumped on. And again, I go back to that play being the one that, maybe they now we're only down one touchdown. We score a touchdown, we take the lead, we can cruise the rest of the way. And second play of the second half is when Doug Evans made it happen.
Yeah, and then the offense made the plays. They played like a really good team. And as I said, they won by 15 points. And they didn't
with their C- game?
Right. Well, I just think in terms of energy, it was like a F or a D because they came back at the end, but they just didn't. I mean, the Rams are horrible. Like all the injuries that you talk about, I don't remember that being as much as an emphasis. It was just that I don't care how many people are hurt. Mm-hmm. The Rams are terrible. You just find a way to beat them, and they did. But my interest in watching it back was also to see the Andre Rison. And I think maybe Favre knew he was that good from the beginning, but it was clear from that, and that being his first game, that he's going to help.
Well, and Brett, one of the memories one of the images I'll have from this game that I didn't remember from the time is Brett putting his arm around Andre at one point. Because Andre had 4 or 5 catches in this game, and Brett had really kind of developed that connection with Andre right away in that game.
Had he been with them in Atlanta? Hadn't they? I
think. Yeah, they cross paths in that.
Right, and I don't remember him saying it as much about Rison, but I think he had a lot of confidence in Rison. Like, he didn't care about all the other stuff. Just like he played with Deion Sanders, and we did a thing with him, and somebody said something about Deion Sanders, and he was just kind of crazy, all the stuff he did. And Brett Favre says, best teammate I ever had. Best teammate I've ever had. Whoa. So, I mean, I think I don't know that I'm sure he didn't have any say in terms of bringing Andre Rison, but I don't think Rison did anything that really surprised Favre. I think he believed he was a smart player, was a good player, was a good teammate, and this is just what we needed, and they showed some of that in the first game.
Bruce Wilkerson, by the way, is the name. It just jogged. He ended up playing in the Super Bowl.
I thought Newhouse was another guy who played.
Yeah,
that was
Marshall
years later.
Newhouse, but Bruce Wilkerson.
Yeah, Wilkerson was the one who was the cow.
The cow. Well, because the story goes, in the Super Bowl, there was like some sort of audible, and usually the offensive line call comes from inside out. But whatever this was, it had to come from the outside in.
From Wilkerson.
So Frank Winters is over the ball and he's yelling at Bruce, I need the call, Bruce. And Chewie says he's right next to Bruce. And Bruce had a terrible stutter. So he's just, he's trying to say the word cow because that was whatever word to kind of, so he just, Bruce, Bruce, I need it. Moo. He just mooed during the middle of the Super Bowl to get the call off. That was
one of the great
Wilkerson's
stories ever. And they didn't have to make up anything.
Nope.
You know, like it really was that. No, that's exactly what happened. The way you did it, and
it's one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard from.
But there you have again, Wolf, not happy with what was going on left tackle with, and I had forgotten that Rutgers had retired that week.
Yeah,
I mean, you know that his part of the season is just forgotten because he wasn't around once all those games became so important, and I just forgotten that he went in that week. I'm done. Really done? Like you can't finish out the year. So
no, he was done. But the Packers were able to overcome it. What's your lasting memory from the 1996 team? You lived it, you covered it, you talked to the guys all the time. What do you remember about that 96 team?
That they were supposed to be that good, and they were. No, there's no, but this happened. Things happened, and they make a lot of changes, and different things occurred that they had to do. But this was supposed to be the year. I mean, the sadness is that they were just too good to win only one title.
Yeah, I mean, when the NFL celebrated their 100th season, USA Today put together a list of the top 100 teams in NFL history. This team was number 9.
And the reality is, history shows that, and what's forgotten about that season is how many breaks the Packers got in terms of who they had to play. Like, you'd forgotten that Denver was really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a shock that was a Jacksonville that beat them.
Yep.
And so then you have the next year, and people have forgotten, and history says the Broncos were better because they beat the Packers and they were the team that won back-to-back. But that was the other part that, you know, everything went their way. They played it well, but they didn't have to play any of the teams in the playoffs that they may have feared the most.
Yeah, well, so they definitely still had a little bit of fear of the Cowboys.
Yes.
But I remember very vividly after the Packers beat the 49ers in the rain and the slop in the divisional round because they had home field advantage that year.
Yes.
Had Dallas beaten Carolina, Dallas would have to come to Lambeau, and there were fans chanting, "We want Dallas."
I wasn't chanting. But yeah, I agree with you. I think they would have beaten Dallas.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to play Dallas.
Nope.
And they didn't have to play the Broncos, and everybody saw the following year
just how good Denver was.
But no, it was, you know, and they hadn't won a championship in so many years, but everybody, it would have been, I don't know that there's ever been a year where it would have been as depressing as it would have been if they hadn't won, because they hadn't won in so long. It's like, hey, they were right there. They believed they were that good. They had everybody to do it, and they did it. So
again, becomes kind of a forgotten game in that 1996 team's lore, but it's the last game that they trailed in the second half. And again, they were very close. It felt like to losing that game. Eventually, end up pulling away after losing back-to-back games, and it just goes down.
And if you ask anybody at the game, they're all going to mention Doug Evans.
Doug Evans. Well, and here's the other thing is, like, I feel like, oh, Doug Evans had the interception and then they cruised. They did cruise the second half, and they struggled a little bit, but then after that game, it seemed like they were on cruise control. Because not only did they not trail in the second half, they won every game by double digits.
And you were never scared in the second half. Like, you go back, and they're only ahead 10-9. But it's not like being down 9-0.
No.
And then he throws an interception, and then those things. You're always ahead. And then I never